right. Currently, I'm sitting in the back of my car uh, doing some analysis prior to my eventual trip to Chicago for the Chicago Open. I had a little bit of a warm up over the past few weeks. I'm coming from Colorado Springs, and I participated in this IHOP event that was held over 2 weeks, 2 rounds a day, game 90 plus 30-second increment. It was quite an interesting event. The first week I was there, I found I got I was paired up against a 1500, which was no problem. Then I got paired up against a OP 1800 little girl who was like a 9-year-old girl who was just an up and comer. Uh, I nearly crushed her out of the opening, but we had a long middle game that ultimately ended up in me overpowering her. But she made me work for those 2 rating points. Um, Now, the unfortunate part about this is one of those situations, maybe one of those rounds, maybe shaking the hand of the person I beat, uh, somehow got me sick for the second portion of the event, like a week later. I knew I was going to be playing against uh, two players that were one was fairly close to 2200, and the other was a little bit over 2100, like 2117. But going into that final round, or that final series of games, I came down with just a massive headache. Like this type of headache would uh, would take out most men, but I'm a warrior, so I did my best to power through it. I played against this kid named Daniel Herman, or not really a kid, young adult. He's like 24 years old, and I unleashed this really interesting idea against him. That I mean, uh, if you're a Kann Sicilian player, you're gonna have to take another look at this one. But it was an interesting idea, and I wanted to show, or I'll show that game. The second game, I was so hurting, or in such pain that I couldn't. I mean, I tried to finish the game as quickly as possible, but the my opponent must have planned very well by playing a slow game like the Exchange French, because I was not at all in the mood of it's base it, my mind trauma was sort of like trying to play a chess game with a migraine. It was just not it was not a good deal. So I had significantly more time on the clock than he did, but I ended up making a mistake, obviously, and ended up throwing away that, or losing that game in what, like 25 moves. So, but overall, it was a 3 point rating loss. But I feel like this third round game was such a good experience that it kind of compensates the 3 points. Let's take a look at that. So I knew this guy. He did not play the French. I knew he was a Kann Sicilian player. Um, I didn't know exactly what variation he would play into the Kann, but I was hoping I would get an the interesting line, which I guess I was lucky to get. So we have knight f6, knight c3, queen c5 or c7, and then pawn to a3, stopping bishop b4. So nothing's out of the ordinary right now. Eventually, a3 is going to be justified when I try to further expand on the queen side with b4. But after a3, he went on to play b6, targeting e4. So I played bishop e3, bishop b7, f3, bishop e7, and then rook c1. mainly for this little trap that if the knight were to come to c6, then I would have a move like knight to d5, which would give me an excellent position after takes and pawn takes. I get the piece back, but I have center and activity. So after rook to c1, he of course did not fall for such a primitive trap. He played d6, and then I think this is when I made my most interesting move, which was g4. The goal behind this is to quickly expand on the king side, and I think it was my goal was to try to force the move g5 g6 in, but try to pick up as much space on the king side as possible, especially knowing that he's likely going to castle on that side. It's like pre-pawn storm. So after g4, he played h6. I played h4, but I can't play g5 because of the pin on the h file. So he played knight d7, ignoring the threat. I played bishop b4 or bishop e2, countering the move like knight e5, targeting like f or c4 f3, and actually preparing this next move, king to f2. A wild move that can be played. It's definitely counterintuitive. You've already done enough to your king side, but to play king to f2, and you just don't care. But I even saw that there was a possibility of bringing the king from d2 to c1, or to c2 to b1, or even in some cases to b3, just in case the c pawn needed a little bit more protection. It's weird, but it kind of works. So after king f2, I was very happy with my position because I knew I wanted a quick game. Mentally, I was barely there. I was trying my best not to force any decisions and make this short miniature longer than it needed to be. So I was putting all my efforts into playing as precisely as possible. I couldn't say computer precise because my mind really wasn't in it this event. So after king f2, the move I expected him to play was g6, but he went for the standard maneuver queen to b8 with the idea of playing queen to a8 to support the advance of the d-pawn, which unfortunately does not apply here. So I got my g5 in. He took. Did he take? Yes, he did take. And then after taking back, I played the move knight, or he played the move knight to h5. And I thought a little bit, but I didn't see any reason not to play the move f4. It just looked too natural. It gained more space, and it should win material. So after f4, he played g6. I took. He took with the rook. I took with the rook. He took back, and I was having some serious considerations here. I was considering playing g6 and trying to take on e6, but all of that seemed inconclusive. And I guess in my headache mode, I just had a bunch of I couldn't fully calculate the depth of what the position looked like in the end, because it was too hard. It was too hard to form thoughts with that beating pain in my forehead. So I went for the one that looked most promising, which was queen takes on h5. I didn't know the clear path to victory, but I was thinking, well, in the end here, I'll be able to take on e6, and his king side is going to be a disaster. So he played knight to c5 as I expected. What cost me the most time was considering how I would deal with knight to d3. I originally didn't want to play d1. I even looked at king to g1. I probably should have looked at it a little bit deeper because it turned out that it was the more precise move. But ultimately, I settled on the conservative option, which might have been more. It might have been more useful for me to keep the rook on the c file in hindsight and play a move like king to g1. But I played rook to d1. So after rook to d1, he took, I took, bishop took, and then I took advantage of this tactic, the pin to f pawn. And after bishop to g6, I believe my evaluation would have been something around like +4 or +5. I didn't know that. I thought it was still an interesting game. So I played knight to g7, that's it, that I expected. And after king to d8, I played queen to h8, and then I noticed that he sort of flinched when I made this move so quickly. I made it in a flash, even though I'm guessing on his part he probably expected me to play f3 or queen to f3 or queen to h1, and on a normal day, I probably would have realized that h1 or f1 was a better option. I was playing ultra conservative, but also trying to like shortcut on fully calculating variations. That's headache talking there. So I gave him the benefit of the doubt that his potential of taking the c4 pawn with the rook was like legit, when actually it wasn't. For instance, if I had immediately come down to h1 and he took on c4, then I'd have the bust there with pawn to f5, which wins the bishop. There's really not much he can do about it other than like c2, d2, trade, and resign. So I ended up playing h8. He probably knew his position was still losing at that point, so really, I mean, I guess he was just expecting more precision than that, and unfortunately I didn't have it. So after queen to h1, he plays rook to g8. I play bishop to d4, protecting the knight, and after bishop f8, I had another think here because I knew I could give my knight an out with h5, but I wanted to go into like closeout mode. So the game plan was to try and try and get away with the move that you wouldn't think that you could get away with, and that move was queen to d5. Because when I played queen to d5, obviously it looks like it's going to drop material on g7, but due to the battery on the d6 pawn, it doesn't. And let's say, for example, he took, and I took on d6, then I have a lot of easy ways to get the dub. Rook to d8. If he blocks with the queen, rook to d7, easy dub. So after queen to d5, he did take. When I took, he didn't immediately recapture, but the game's pretty much reaching its conclusion. It's probably lasts about another 3 moves. He plays queen b7. The go behind that is if we trade off queens, it's I'm still up 2 pawns, so if I was really like late or carelessly lazy, I would snap the queens off, but realize that there are opposite colored bishops that I might still give him a potential draw with. So knowing that, and I mean, I just being afraid of having to calculate out whether the extra 2 pawns was still enough to get the dub, I totally avoided that. So I took on d6. He played king to c8, and my last critical thought here, I considered a bunch of moves. One was bishop to f8 with the idea of queen to d8, but I thought after bishop f8 he would play queen to c7 and force the trade of queens, which is a situation I do not want to put myself through. So I abandoned that. I spent most of my time looking at bishop to e5, and I mean, I liked the fact that it kept the queen stuck to the 7th rank, and computer evaluation said it was the most efficient as well. But I ended up going for c5 because I was just taken away by the threat of c6, and the fact that if he did take, which he did, I could immediately close the game out with rook to c1, which I did, and the game ended just like that. So currently I'm in Iowa City, and I have about a week to try and power up for the Chicago Open. I'm going to be playing in the U2300 section, and hopefully I can get 7 dubs. I want to sweep the field this year. I feel mentally prepared to do it, but I'm sure a lot of other promising chess players in the U2300 section are probably saying the same thing. So we'll see in about a week.